Hello and welcome to this webinar on conflict analysis as a tool for water diplomacy. I guess people are still joining us a little bit, but let them join and I'll commence the webinar already. It's great to see so many of you joining us today for this really what I expect to be a really interesting discussion. So my name is Emma Hakala. I'm a senior research fellow here at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, and I will be the chair or host of the webinar today. And as I mentioned, we will be talking about water diplomacy and conflict analysis. And as I'm sure at least some of you know, water diplomacy is the sort of prevention and resolution of conflicts using tools from both water cooperation and diplomacy. And I guess it's quite clear that in an era of climate change and all kinds of geopolitical and economic crises, the pressure on water is getting increasingly strong. But then at the same time, water can also bring solutions and sources of cooperation for us. And this is what also creates an increasing need for water diplomatic efforts. But then this puts up a spotlight on conflict analysis, because in order to be able to do measures and actions on water diplomacy, we need to have an adequate understanding of the operating environment and of the consequences that the measures that we implement are going to have. And this is what we will be talking about today. But before we go into that, I would like to first point out that this webinar is organized as a part of the project Water Cooperation and Peace, Finnish Water Way, which is led by the Finnish Environment Institute in cooperation with us here at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. And we would especially like to thank the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Agriculture, and the Ministry of Environment for funding the project and also being very active in participating in it. We will actually have several speakers from these ministries joining us today. So that is great for us. And just a few words maybe about the project. So it basically supports the implementation of the Finnish approach to water diplomacy, which aims to contribute to sustaining peace and ensuring security by making water visible in peace initiatives and in Finland's foreign and security policy. And the project aims to increase this sort of Finnish collaboration internationally on water diplomacy. And it also sort of identifies and responds to the needs in Finnish and international water diplomacy training and competence building, and also deepens the cooperation between experts and foreign and security policy and peace mediation and the water sector. The project also coordinates the Finnish Water Diplomacy Network, and I'm sure that we have many participants joining us today from the network, which is great. And the network kind of brings together experts from the ministries, from academia, from research institutions, non-governmental organizations, and the private sector. So yes, and the webinar today kind of marks one of the sort of concrete results that we have now of the project, which are two publications, or actually one English publication, which is the guideline on this conflict analysis tool that we have developed with my colleague Katariina Mustasilta here at FIA. And well, I will actually not go that much into the actual tool because Katariina will present it in just a moment. But the guideline is available in English on the website of the Finnish Environment Institute, and you can find it. I can also put it in the chat as we start with the presentation. And we also have a Finnish very short summary of the guideline, which aims to sort of explain how the water or the conflict analysis tool for water diplomacy is supposed to be implemented. Yes, so I guess we are ready to start. So we will start with the presentation of Katarina about the conflict analysis tool and the sort of meaning of conflict analysis in water diplomacy. And this will be followed by comments from our colleague from the Foreign Ministry, Mr. Antti Rautavaara. And then we will hear a panel discussion later on, and I will introduce our excellent speakers then. And just as a side note, or actually a very important note already at this point, you are free to ask questions, and I really hope, because we have such an expert audience, that you will pose questions, and also because for us it's really important to still continue to develop this conflict analysis tool. So we are really interested in all kinds of feedback. So please write down your questions in the chat, and we'll then read them, or where possible we can also maybe give you the floor. But without further ado, I will let Katarina get on with her presentation. And just to present Katarina, she's my colleague from FIA. She works in the European Union research program, and her research really focuses on conflict dynamics and peace mediation and all things connected to those issues. And she has previously worked or led the Finland in Afghanistan research project. So the floor is yours, Katarina.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. Also on my behalf, as Emma said, it's really great to see so many of you joining us today to discuss conflict analysis for water diplomacy. Let me just start by putting on the presentation. I hope everything works technically as it should. So yes, again, welcome, and it's really great to have this discussion. And as Emma said, I will now present the sort of main tenets of this conflict analysis for water diplomacy model that we have developed and applied within the framework of this project, Finnish Waterway. And I have indeed mainly been of kind of help in this project, helping Emma and our colleagues in the Finnish Waterway project with this conflict analysis and thinking about conflict analysis, particularly when it comes to water diplomacy. And I will present the main tenets basically following the structure of the guidelines that Emma mentioned, that I think Emma can indeed put into the comment a link to the guidelines. They are free to read online. And as Emma also said, we very much are still developing this umbrella tool and thinking about ways to apply it. So we really look forward to conversation on this. And I'll start on a couple of words for why conflict analysis is important for water diplomacy. And I'll then go into what conflict analysis actually is, what's its purpose, particularly when it comes to water diplomacy. And then I'll go into the main dimensions of the tool that we use. And then I will give floor to Emma, who will then give a short presentation of the first practical example that we used in applying the conflict analysis model. So to start from the why question, conflict analysis is crucial for water diplomacy, essentially because of the nature of water diplomacy itself. So as Emma already referred to, within the project, we define water diplomacy as these efforts that aim at prevention and resolution of political tensions over water and its use by drawing on water expertise and diplomatic tools. And the key attributes here are, first of all, the fact that water diplomacy is normative in the sense that it aims at enhancing cooperative management of water and challenges related to water, and preventing potential incompatibilities between two parties or more that relate to water from escalating into violent and sort of disruptive conflicts. And it does this by being multidisciplinary. So it uses both technical and requires both technical, high-level water expertise, as well as then, of course, diplomatic tools. And what this essentially means is that water diplomacy is inherently political. It intervenes in a situation that is political by nature, and there are no technical solutions, no matter how much of technical expertise one would have, to a water related challenging situation. And what this then requires is that in order for water diplomatic efforts to be preventive and to foster cooperation rather than to induce tensions and conflicts themselves, these efforts need to be based on a thorough understanding of the political, social, broader environmental dynamics in that context. And this, we argue, requires conflict analysis. And then, of course, Emma already referred to the general need for water diplomacy, which we find, and I think we can all agree, is increasing in the world, given megatrends such as climate change, urbanization, demographic developments. But also, I would add, even though there is no direct, straightforward causal link between water challenges and conflict escalation, this relationship is very complex, as we know. We do unfortunately see a lot of overlapping when we look at vulnerable regions that are vulnerable both in terms of conflict histories and fragility, as well as then, for instance, water scarcity. So this just underlines the importance of building any water diplomatic efforts on conflict analysis. So what is conflict analysis and what's its purpose? We define conflict analysis in very broad terms as systematic examination of the structures, institutions, actors, drivers, and dynamics related to a potential conflict and its prevention and resolution. And one can identify sort of three interrelated purposes for conflict analysis. So obviously the main purpose of conflict analysis is to gain an understanding of a situation, but also an understanding of the potential intervention, in this case, water diplomatic intervention in that situation from the perspective of conflict vulnerabilities, conflict risks, conflict implications. And secondly, through this enhanced understanding of that situation, conflict analysis can enable conflict sensitivity, which simply means that the actions, in this case, water diplomatic actions, take into account those potential conflict dynamics that are already escalated, or in a preventive case, the risks and structural vulnerabilities, and also the peace-inducing factors that are present in a situation. And through doing this, conflict analysis can also enable implementation of the do no harm principle, which then again means that the water diplomatic efforts themselves do not induce tensions. They do not contribute to a situation in a way that would increase grievances or create opportunities to actually escalate the situation. Because as we all, I'm sure, know, good deeds do not suffice in kind of doing good, and therefore conflict analysis really stands as this basis for not doing harm with the efforts themselves. And thirdly, through conflict analysis, one can possibly go further and actually identify opportunities and spaces for proactive action that then fosters peaceful development. And this, of course, again, is kind of the key of water diplomacy, right? In terms of its kind of purpose. Conflict analysis this way comes close to other kind of analytical frameworks that one could use in kind of before development cooperation, for instance, risks assessments or other types of kind of assessments that one does before taking action. But I would make a difference between these analytical frameworks and conflict analysis in the sense that conflict analysis approaches a situation explicitly through conflict lenses. So explicitly through this notion of looking into the conflict factors and also peace factors, and looking at the interaction between different actors from a potential conflict perspective. Now, what is really important, though, is to acknowledge that this does not mean that for conflict analysis to be useful or for it to be relevant, there should already be an active conflict situation or an imminent threat of a conflict escalation. We at least see that conflict analysis is useful anytime an actor is potentially engaging, in this case, water diplomatic efforts in a situation that has any even kind of structural vulnerabilities that need to be taken into account, which I would say technically covers almost all situations. So conflict analysis as a tool really doesn't mean that there is already a conflict situation or there would be a claim that there is a conflict situation in the present. So it really can be a preventive tool. Now, the starting point for our thinking and our model in conflict analysis for water diplomacy is this so-called PACT model that at least the International Alert has already been using for quite some time in terms of their conflict analysis framework. And the name comes from the model's focus on 4 key dimensions that then gain understanding of a situation through conflict lenses. And these are profile, actors, conflict factors or causes, and dynamics. And these I will go into very shortly. This model can be understood as an umbrella tool in that it really tries to look at a situation from a holistic point of view and gain a comprehensive understanding of that situation. And we found this to be very useful for our purposes and for the purpose of water diplomacy, precisely because water diplomacy is needed in such different situations, particularly when it comes to this scale of being a prevention case in a relatively stable, peaceful situation to a situation that is already escalated, maybe not around water per se, but still already a conflictual situation where one can still think of using water diplomacy as a means to foster cooperation. But these situations are very different, and we found it useful to work with a tool that could be accommodated to these different situations. Of course, this then means that this model and tool needs to be applied based on the situation and the needs in that situation. So to give an example, in a active conflict situation where there are clear conflict parties to be identified, it might be more important to focus on the actors and try to differentiate between the interests and the positions of those actors, rather than then again in a different scenario, a more calm, peaceful situation where water diplomacy is used in a very preventive fashion and just as a means indeed to foster cooperation. It might make more sense to use other methods to really try to identify conflict vulnerabilities, even in that, and kind of be aware of them when planning water diplomacy even when there is no imminent threat of conflict. And then in our model, there are a couple of other points that we specifically emphasize and bring into this PACT model. And the first one is, of course, attention to water's role. So we look at water both as a conflict factor. I'll get into this. But then, of course, we look at how other conflict factors and the situation in general influences water and its use in a situation. And then the second aspect is to acknowledge and pay attention to peace enablers and peace factors aside conflict factors. So conflict analysis shouldn't only look at conflictual factors, but also pay attention to the existing resilience and resources in a situation that actually can foster peace. And then the last point in general to acknowledge about our model is that it can accommodate and accommodates multiple levels of analysis and multiple levels of societal dynamics. So meaning local dynamics, national dynamics, transboundary and international dynamics. And this we find very important in terms of water diplomatic efforts, because even if those efforts would focus on, let's say, transboundary water management, which is the focus of our project as well, it's still important to analyze and be aware of how transboundary water management and water diplomacy influences, for instance, local communities, maybe particularly in the border regions, and their water use and water access. So here you see the model in a nutshell. And now I will go shortly through each of these core dimensions. So the model starts from profile, which we find a good starting point to get a kind of background, a check and overview of the situation. So in a simple definition or way to define profile is that it kind of is meant to give an overview of the socioeconomic, political, and the broader environmental profile of that context, be it a region or a country or even a local context. So here one looks at the governance institutions, the demographics, the conflict histories of that situation, the societal cleavages that are historically constructed. In our model, we again place special emphasis on the existing water resources. So the profile in terms of water. What are the water resources? How does their future look like? What are the water governance system in place, both formal and informal? And of course, the way a person who is conducting conflict analysis and who is hopefully kind of working with those people who are then planning to conduct the actual water diplomatic efforts needs to go into this profile depends on how familiar they are with the situation. So if the context is very familiar to the analyst and the team as a whole, then this profile dimension perhaps does not need a lot of resources or a lot of time because it is this overview part of the model. But this depends again on the familiarity and of course at the same time it is important to construct an overview of the situation. Actors refer to the political actors and population groups that influence the situation and are influenced by the situation. We look at particularly, of course, the key potential conflict parties, both state and non-state parties, as well as then those groups that are particularly vulnerable in that potential conflict situation or particularly vulnerable when it comes to water and water challenges. What is also important and what we include in our model is an examination of the external actors. It's good to be aware that the potential water diplomatic efforts, if they are conducted by international actors that are outsiders to that situation, are also part of the external actors. So external actors can be parties that support one or the other conflict parties, but they can also be, and they should also include actors that come from the outside of that particular situation, but are there already to provide support in terms of conflict resolution, for instance. And then again, it's important to acknowledge and examine the potential peacemakers, both internal as well as existing external initiatives, so that one can situate the potential water diplomatic efforts of oneself in this context of the existing initiatives. And here, it's important to remember the multi-level interdependencies between local actors, national actors, and international actors that I already mentioned. Conflict factors refer to, on the one hand, structural causes of conflicts. Structural causes refer to these rather already solid and hard to revert conditions and factors that are kind of entrenched in the fabric of the society or the international relation that we are interested in, and that contribute to grievances or give opportunities to conflict escalation. So in practice, these are, for instance, political inequalities, economic inequalities, poor governance capabilities or structures, systemic corruption, etc. Then we look at conflict drivers that are more of the proximate causes of conflict escalation. These can be arms proliferation, for instance, or hostile rhetoric by political actors present, misinformation flows, human rights violations, and a spike in human rights violations. And then we look at triggers or separate triggers. And triggers refer to these catalyses of conflict escalation, which are also hard often to kind of foresee or predict, but they are the events that sort of break the camel's neck. And why it's important to kind of analyze the situation by categorizing the different conflict factors into, for instance, these structural drivers and triggers, is that it helps to identify priorities for the particular action that is planned to be taken, and also space for action. So it might be that there is no space or kind of time to deal with the underlying conflict causes immediately. That takes time, and it might be that it's actually more urgent and it's more possible to address some of the drivers in a situation. And then again, with conflict factors, our special attention goes to water resources and water management, which we see can play the role or can be linked to all of these different categories of conflict factors. They can be structural causes if water resources are inequally in an unjust way divided in a society or distributed in a society. Water resources can be used as conflict weapons in a conflict situation. So kind of denying access to water from certain population groups, for instance, which can then become a driver of the conflict as well. And conflict water-related factors such as sudden water scarcity or the effect on this on food security and insecurity can trigger societal conflict processes. And again, it's important to look at not only the conflict factors, but the peace factors, which I already discussed. And lastly, dynamics then refer to the resulting interactions, interdependencies, and escalation cycles that derive from the interplay of the profile, actors, and conflict factors and causes. And kind of looking at the dynamics between different actors and how they relate to the vulnerabilities found in the profile or to the driving conflict factors gives a holistic understanding to the analyst. And here as well, it's important to look at, and one can look at where the situation and kind of build a picture of where the situation is going. So what are the actors that might be escalating the situation? What are the current main conflict incompatibilities? And how do the future dynamics look like based on these factors? And again, we look at water-related dynamics in particular. And here one can think about two-way street. On the one hand, how does again water generate and contribute to the general conflict dynamics? And on the other hand, how do the general conflict dynamics influence water use, different users, water governance, and the role of water in general in that relationship that one is interested in. So and in this dynamic space, we also find it important to keep in mind this triple nexus thinking. So basically, to acknowledge the interdependencies between the existing humanitarian development, peace efforts, and also dynamics, and again try to think of water and water-related challenges in relation to these different dimensions of the triple nexus. And based on the dynamics and based on then having gone through this conflict analysis process, one can identify the risks and needs, or the aim is to be able to identify the risks, needs, and opportunities for water diplomatic efforts. And I think one important aspect here is that based on the conflict analysis, if one really uses it as this basis for the water diplomatic efforts, it should be possible that the answer is that there is no space at the moment for such water diplomatic efforts that one had originally thought of, because the dynamics and the situation doesn't allow for those. And still the conflict analysis would be very useful because it would have given this very useful knowledge. Very shortly, and then I hand it over to Emma, a couple of remarks that we've thought about in general when it comes to this very general conflict analysis model. First of all, as I already mentioned, the nature of the situation and also the type of the water diplomatic efforts that have been thought of, they should shape the conflict analysis. So we can think about, again, different scenarios in terms of whether a situation has already escalated or whether it is a more vulnerable situation, but still peaceful. And in these situations, the concrete methods that one uses to gather information on these 4 dimensions and to create the conflict analysis should differ. And then again, in situations where water diplomatic efforts might have been already kind of requested from a particular actor, the focus might be more narrow and kind of preset and pre-designed also in the conflict analysis, compared to a situation where an actor doesn't have as clear purpose and task at hand with the water diplomatic efforts. But nevertheless, we think that all of these dimensions should be addressed in any situation. With conflict analysis, what is essential, as always, is of course sufficient resources, particularly human resources, I would emphasize the usefulness and the importance of gaining local and having access to local expertise, particularly when it comes to the profile, actors, their relations. It is important to use different types of expertise and also um, to have access to local views on the situation. And one, I think, important point to consider is, and something that we have discussed, is the conflict sensitivity of the conflict analysis itself. So this notion that to speak of conflict analysis can, of course, be politically sensitive if it is taken to mean that there is conflict vulnerability or conflict risk in a situation. And therefore, I think it's important to kind of think about conflict analysis as kind of integrated into and other analysis frameworks in general, and then maybe in certain situations, one needs to think about how to actually call or name the analysis, even when it is useful to look at the situation from conflict perspective. Um, I'll stop here. The last thing I want to say is that the way we have thought about conflict analysis, and this relates to the timing, is that, of course, the sooner the better. It should be the basis of designing water diplomatic efforts. But at the same time, it's good to think of it not as this one-time exercise, but more of an approach to planning the water diplomatic efforts, but also to monitoring them, and to developing them when the situation changes. So it should not just be kind of conducted once before the activities, but there should be from time to time updates on that, and more of it could be thought of as a perspective to this situation where water diplomatic efforts are used. And now I will hand it over to Emma.
Yes, thank you. And thanks for the really good presentation of the model. I will just give you some few words quite shortly about a case study or a pilot project that we did on Central Asia. And this is maybe to illustrate the kind of variability of the conflict analysis tool. So, and the idea of this study specifically was exactly what Katarina just mentioned about the sort of kind of forward-looking idea that you rather look at issues well in advance and try to understand how they are developing. Um, and I guess in many ways this pilot project was a kind of an exercise in that, because we wanted to do like a forward-looking desk study, and it was really a water diplomacy analysis of Central Asia, just using the conflict analysis tool. So clearly not expecting or investigating any potential conflict as such in Central Asia, but trying to understand the situation there. And our specific point of view was to understand the potential for Finnish water diplomacy actions in Central Asia. And I should mention here that I will not go into the results or very details of the analysis, because we have published a report which is available on the FIA website. I can also put it in the chat. So I thought that I will just kind of illustrate some of the aims that we had, and then the outputs that we had in this case, and maybe some of the kind of outcomes for further consideration. So the aim of this study was to increase understanding of the water diplomacy context in Central Asia, and to gain some sort of insight on appropriate water diplomacy responses or actions in practice that could be used. And the outputs of the project were just this report, which I mentioned, and then to draft some potential options for possible actions without really any kind of commitment to any specific actions at this point. So this was really kind of like a tentative more research rather than really preparing the ground for any actions. And therefore, we chose to do a desk study because we wanted to keep it very sort of to ourselves in a way. But of course, at the same time, it's difficult to do a very sort of full comprehensive study completely as a desk study. And therefore, it is one of the reasons that we didn't really come up with any sort of very practical actions yet. But also we tried to then kind of get a bit of a broader idea by interviewing some experts on Central Asia, and also including the Finnish Water Diplomacy Network, which I earlier mentioned, in the preparation of the analysis. So we had this sort of hearings or more like discussions during the implementation of the project, so that we could gain a bit of a better idea. And then just to give you some idea of the sort of broader outcomes that can come out of this kind of an analysis, we kind of identified the water energy dynamics in Central Asia as a cause of tension, which is not in a way like a new finding. It's very acknowledged in the region. But then from the Finnish point of view, then that means that we should whatever we do, we should put a lot of emphasis on the water, food, energy nexus approach, which is also something that Finland has quite a lot of expertise on. Then we identified a need to reform the transboundary water governance institutions in the regions, but then also that it's very difficult for various reasons to do that there. But then perhaps one thing that the Finnish experience could offer is a long kind of cooperation with UNECE and many experts who have been working on UNECE, specifically on transboundary water cooperation. So perhaps we have something to offer there. Then we also identified the emerging and increasing risks from climate change, which could be something that kind of unifies all of the Central Asian countries, that they kind of have to work together to prepare for those issues. So there could be a potential for kind of building political cooperation on previous Finnish cooperation on these sort of hydrometeorological projects that we have had there. So there's some kind of ground to build upon there potentially. And then we also pointed out that there already are several international actors working in Central Asia and have been working for many years. So many things have already in a way been done. So whatever Finland does, it would have to be kind of based on coordination and partnerships with others rather than just trying to go solo in a way and try to do something completely new alone. So this was just one analysis, and it was very much like a pilot study, as I mentioned. And this is maybe a kind of a very work-intensive way of doing a conflict analysis. And we are now currently doing other sort of experiments with different kinds of analysis where it's possible, for example, to cooperate a lot more with ministry colleagues. And the idea really is that we at FIA will not be the ones kind of owning the conflict analysis tool, but rather that it will be taken up by other organizations which will then utilize it. But I will also stop here, and now I will give the floor to our colleague Antti from the Foreign Ministry. So Antti is the Finland's special envoy for water, and maybe he can also explain a little bit what that means. But in that role, he is the sort of advocate of the Finnish waterway strategy, and it's a unique platform housed at the political department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, uniting the Finnish water society to work together with national and international partners towards a water secure world by 2030. And the special envoy is coordinated, or he coordinates and represents the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Trade, and Ministry of Trade and Employment. So Antti has his work cut out for him. But he has also previously been working on water issues all around the world, and for example, for UNICEF and UNDP. So yes, that's his background, but I will now give you the floor. Antti, please.
Thank you, Emma and Katarina. Just checking that you hear me properly.
Yes.
Good. So thank you very much for, first of all, doing all this work on water diplomacy analysis. And I also want to extend thanks for the whole network, because it has been a long process for us in Finland to sort of get our thinking around the analytical work over the past years. And it's quite great to see that, now we're having a quite good audience on this webinar to discuss it. And as you know, I'm an end user coming from the foreign ministry. And so if you take a look at the wider global foreign and security policy horizon, which is rapidly changing, we have the Russian aggression to Ukraine being a reality. We have a sunset of globalization and probably a dusk of a polarized world order. So there are really large geopolitical and power competition changes in the globe, and this trend seems to be intensifying. And the natural resources, water being part of that group, is quite central and important in many of the global geopolitical processes. And then we have the nation states that are securing their own food, energy securities. They have a mineral supply interests, as well as the water security needs. And of course, they are not just looking at present day, but they are also looking at what is the population 25 years from now or 50 years from today. And they need to take care of all these security issues that they are facing. And, we have at times countries that are securing those national interests through the global conventions, such as the UNECE Helsinki Water Convention. And in other cases, might be through unilateral actions, where we typically have a, upstream country securing or utilizing their location upstream, having a dam or something like that, which is then creating tensions in the basin. So, a lot of strategic interests related to natural resources are in play, both in national states, but also within the states. We have different armed forces and groups which are active. And, one example which is, quite visible today is, for example, Sudan, which is in turmoil and of armed conflict, if not a civil war. So, that type of picture where we are. And every day we learn that the natural resources and water is even more centrally involved in wide processes. So then we come to the issue of water diplomacy. We had a long discussion before about the definition of it and how the analytics around it works. But the key there is that we are talking about politically oriented process that aims to prevent and resolve conflicts on shared waters. So we can do things way before the conflicts happen in areas. And we have a lot of analytics done by Aalto University and Water Peace and Security Partnership, for example, who are looking at the water resources on a continental or global basis. And they can define that in certain areas, the trajectory seems to be way off, that conflicts may be happening. So now, then when we talk about the water diplomacy itself, we got the Council conclusions of EU back in 2018. And, many of you might remember, but it was a 7 pages long document opening up the concept, talking about the different regions, explicitly telling how important it is to work on water diplomacy. But then the last para, it comes down to what should be done or what could be done. And the only thing that it says, I actually went back and read it. It says that the Commission and member states should give a necessary consideration to the importance of water in the programming of future finance and technical cooperation. Program more financial and technical resources. But to what? This was the question we had in mind in 2018-19. We were thinking that, we all think this is important, but how and what should we be doing? And for that purpose, we got the very good spin-off of dialogues, which originally initiated through the Aalto University's work on the pathway analysis, which was used as a sort of a founding cornerstone of this work that you see today. The pathway analysis was conducted as a desktop survey in 2 regions. And then we realized that when we talk about the peace mediation, we have to also embed the work into peace mediation, verbalics and concepts and accurate tools. So that's why we decided that we need to take the path of conflict analysis, which now then was presented to you just a moment ago. And the specific sort of issues that I want to pick up, and maybe there's a discussion in the panel later on, is about the fact that the timeline is so important. So we want to be very preventive. So we say that we should be looking at some region maybe already 10 years before the conflicts are rising. But then we have to be doing something at least before some sort of a tipping point in that region comes. Because we can now already see that in several transboundary basins, we have passed the tipping point of, let's say, less or a little bit easier way of finding a solution. If you take a look at the Nile region, the Blue Nile, we see that the tipping point was probably 2011, and after that it has been 12 years incredibly difficult to get even the parties into the table to talk. And there's also a key point here saying that get the parties into the table to talk, because if you have a conflict, the only way to resolve the conflict is that the conflict parties resolve it themselves. So the external actors who would be utilizing this type of conflict, water diplomacy, conflict analysis, we can only design activities that we as external actors can take or consider taking. And these activities then need to be turned into a confidence building measure so that the parties themselves start to resonate between each other and start to see the benefits of the cooperations. In an optimal case, of course, then the good side of joining the UNECE Helsinki Water Convention. So, in the document, we combine the natural resources, water, with foreign policy and security policy. When we say water diplomacy, we very specifically also mean entire selection of natural resources. The water is at the heart of it because it's crossing the borders, it's easy to measure. But if you have the conflict, the activities that this tool will give you most likely talk about nexus approach, most likely talk about energy, agriculture, and forestry, because the things that we can utilize as confidence building measures are not always in the water domain. So it also means that we have to move away from the water bubble and engage with other parts of if this is a Finnish exercise of Finnish society, we could talk with the parliamentarians, have an exchanges at that level, or we should be talking together with other actors who are active. For example, in the case of Central Asia, we should be talking with the Swiss colleagues, of course. Then again, this is a snapshot in time. I think Katarina said that, you know, this could be then replicated or amended periodically afterwards so that we could get to see that what is happening in there. And as was said, there is the launch has taken place of the analytics for Central Asia. We also have an exercise where a dissertation at the university was utilizing this approach in a case study on Orange River Basin. This was also launched mid-April, unfortunately only in Finnish language. And there is the internal exercise that we now do on the South Caucasus for ourselves to see that can we utilize the ministry reporting and combine that with the natural resources and water discussions. So maybe I leave it here. Hopefully we have a very good panel discussion and good questions coming from the audience. But at the end, I want to say those who are not coming from Finland, but please don't think this as a Finnish thing. This is supposed to be, you know, a good office of Finland producing something for the global community of water, peace and security to utilize in the future. So, you know where to find us, and you can get access to documents easily. So hopefully this now produces opportunities to us engage more in certain geographical areas. Thank you. I'll leave it there, Emma. Thanks.
Thank you, Antti. That was really good to hear from you, your insights, and really good points that we have discussed, I think, even during the preparation of the tool, and we'll continue to take into account. We have time for just one question, I think, before the panel, because there is one question in the chat from Tiina Byring-Ilboda. She's wondering if this model will also accommodate the religious beliefs as conflict factors. And I guess I can give the floor to Katarina to answer that.
Thank you, Emma. Yes, so that's a great question, and the answer is yes. So also as Antti was referring to all these interdependencies between water and all other types of conflict-inducing factors, our model really starts from this understanding that even when this model is specifically geared towards water diplomacy, it by no means means that when we look at conflict factors, we should only look at kind of directly water-related factors or natural resources related factors, but conflict factors in general, and then look at, of course, also their relationship to water management and access to water, etc. But so this then would include and mean that when looking at conflict factors through workshops, expert hearings, interviews, background research, one focuses on those factors that in that particular situation drive conflicts, and these can be religious beliefs, for instance, or perhaps more generally religion-related grievances and kind of politicization of sectarian relations, for instance. So definitely it would accommodate this as well.
Great. Thank you, Katarina, for clearing that up. We will then move to the panel discussion, but I should still emphasize that we are very willing to answer questions also after the panel or during the panel. So please do feel free to write them down in the chat as we are speaking. But now I would ask maybe our panelists, if you're able to put on your camera, then please do so. And I will introduce our speakers briefly. So we have Annukka Lipponen, who is the chief specialist from the Finnish Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, where she's focusing on international cooperation in water management Yes, yeah. And her responsibilities include the EU and international water policy, bilateral water cooperation, and promotion of water expertise and business. She has also been working for UNESCO for several years, for example, in Central Asia and headquarters. And she's very well experienced water expert who has been very active in our project as well. Then we have Lasse Peltonen, who is a professor at the University of Eastern Finland. He's the professor of environmental governance and conflict resolution, and he has both academic and practical experience on conflict resolution and collaborative approaches in environmental land use and natural resource contexts. And he has specifically been working on this core project funded by the Strategic Research Council of the Academy of Finland, which focuses on these issues. Welcome, Lasse, as well. Then we have Mark Zeytoun, who is the Director General of the Geneva Water Hub and Professor of Water Security at the University of East Anglia. He has led multiple research and water supply projects and supported water negotiations in Middle East and Africa, for example. And his research focuses on international transboundary water conflict and cooperation, armed conflict, or the influence of armed conflict on water services, and the links between water and health, for example. Welcome to the panel. Then we have Alissa Offutt, who is a doctoral candidate from the IHE Delft Institute for Water Education, where she works on water conflict and water conflict cooperation and diplomacy. And she has been researching multiscalar relationships between water quality, conflict cooperation, and environmental justice in transboundary basins. And she has also worked on water diplomacy initiatives, contributing to the water peace and security partnerships, which work in Mali and Iraq, for example. Welcome to Alissa as well. And then we have Soili Mäkeläinen Buhanist, who is the Finland's ambassador in Astana, covering Kazakhstan and the Kyrgyz Republic since September 2020. And she has previously worked in the foreign ministry, for example, in the Department of International Trade, and also in the Department of Russia, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia, and also worked as an advisor in the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development previously. So welcome to all our panelists. I'm really happy that you could join us. We will start with one question that will be common to every one of you. So I would like to know a little bit about your own background in water diplomacy, because I know that you come from sort of different backgrounds. Some of you are researchers, some of you are more on the ministry side. So what is your own background and approach to water diplomacy, and what kinds of benefits, if any, do you see in conflict analysis as a tool for water diplomacy? And I guess we can maybe start with, for example, let's start with Annukka.
Many thanks indeed. Glad to be here. So thanks for the kind invitation, and congratulations to the developers Emma and Katarina for this conflict analysis tool. It's been great to see how it has evolved to this point. And well, I've had a bit of a viewpoint, as mentioned, because I'm representing Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry in the steering group of this Finnish water diplomacy project. So personally, since I'm specialist on water resources and groundwater, a bit more specifically, I appreciate very much the structured approach of the conflict analysis tool. I also, since I worked for some 20 years in international water cooperation and transboundary water cooperation, I see it as a good framework also to bring forward some of the tools of the Finnish water diplomacy, like the water allocation, which commonly is so conflict prone, the Nexus approach, which Antti also referred to, and of course the Helsinki Water Convention as an important tool. I guess my view on water diplomacy is very much about the synergy and kind of seeing the value of bringing together the technical solutions and technical water expertise, and then to the use by diplomacy or the diplomatic efforts on the other side. And I think this better understanding and more concerted action together, it really can add value. So no doubt this is a very valuable tool. I can see personally that it can help me to structure or broaden my thinking, and I imagine that this is the case also for many people in the Finnish Water Diplomacy Network, as it's a bit of a mix of technical people and diplomats also. And I think the approach, it, in addition to looking at more analytically potential for conflicts and friction, the thinking can also help to communicate better about the security and foreign policy aspects, like for a technical person like myself, to make it also more relevant to the diplomatic corps. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Annukka. And I forgot to say, but Annukka already showed a good example by keeping her answer quite short, because we have so many panelists that we don't have a lot of time. But yes, the same question, then maybe we'll jump to Mark next. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Emma and Katarina and Antti. Really great to see everyone. My background is, well, I've been a humanitarian aid water engineer. I've also been a researcher and professor of water security at the university, so studied transboundary water conflicts quite a bit. I've been advising the Palestinian side on their negotiations, on their formal negotiations with Israel, and also as Director General of the Geneva Water Hub, just fascinated by the topic. In my experience, one of the things I might share is that negotiations are always ongoing, even in situations that are stuck in transboundary water arrangements where it doesn't look like a lot is happening. So if you look at negotiations theory, it talks a lot about informal negotiations. And that's all the positioning, the messaging, you know, what's said in New York or in this or that forum or that water week. All of that strengthens or weakens your position when you finally get to the table. And so diplomacy, water diplomacy, should follow suit. I think we should realize that water diplomacy always has a role to play by looking at those things like positioning, messaging, narratives, etc. And so I think your study is great for bringing up the, what it does is give us a systematic way of spotting opportunities to move towards effective cooperation. And I don't use that term cooperation lightly. I mean effective cooperation. I think it's fabulous that you've put in, you know, well, I think it's the first time I've seen a serious application of conflict sensitivity and analysis that peace-building organizations use for water diplomacy. I like the fact that it forces us to do deeper case studies away from the general trend spotting large N type of analysis. And I love the fact that it sees water as inherently political. And so in effect downplays a little bit the role of climate change and other environmental factors, which have their place obviously, but are, in my opinion, often overemphasized over the political and economic issues that really drive the tensions. I also appreciate the fact that it's incorporating the context, especially that political economy, and the structural causes, like in power asymmetries, and the very tough situation that those riparians who were in a weak political situation face. And maybe I can elaborate on that at the second question. So back over to you, Emma.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mark. And maybe I should add here that the following question will be a bit more about the potential critique and maybe improvements to our model. So it won't be all just giving us high praise. But let's move next, maybe to Alyssa, if you're ready.
Sure. Thank you, Emma, for the question, and thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this panel. I also approach water diplomacy, but as a researcher, where I assess the development of conflict and cooperation between states, and particularly as a result of water quality and domestic pressures. But as you also mentioned in my introduction, I also approach that kind of nexus between water and conflict at a local and subnational level as a practitioner that supports conflict sensitive decision making over water issues as part of the Water Peace and Security Partnership. So it's really nice to see the different kind of scales and pressure that you've brought into this particular conflict analysis. And I would agree, I think, with all the prior panelists that I absolutely can see application for this work in water diplomacy. And I think it's a critical starting point to any analysis for research, but as well as any practitioner before even entering into a situation and figuring out where the entry points to work in this space are. And what I really liked that you emphasized also within the text that I read in the presentation today is the iterative nature of conflict analyses. That really you could start it at a desktop study just to start to figure out who you should be talking to and what those entry points are. But that really gives a space to talk with actors and refine it a lot further to understand more of the perceptions and priorities of different people within the conflict, as well as what might be tolerated for potential solutions. So I absolutely see a beneficial application to this conflict analysis, specifically for water diplomacy between states, but then also subnationally as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Then we'll go over to Lasse. Please go ahead.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, everybody. So, and thanks for the invitation. It's very nice to be with you. And I was earlier in the process commenting a little bit on the development of the tool, and it's now I'm really happy to see how it's been completed, and also the whole report, including the discussion on the kind of context and the application. I think it's a great piece of work. So congratulations for completing this task. But I guess so just maybe from my background first time, my work has mostly been related to environmental conflicts and in a kind of non-violent conflict sense, and also more in the kind of subnational, sub-state level. So I've been working with cases in Finland, for instance, with land use, natural resources, nature conservation issues, and so on and so forth. And also I've been involved in my kind of practical work. I've been working with a few conflicts mapping or conflicts analysis cases, including forest conflicts in northern Finland, and also some water-related issues, including a water visioning process and a kind of river basin-wide water visioning process at Iijoki in northern Finland, also, and involving hydropower and fisheries and so on. And then also in yet another kind of very further north in Finland with the conflict related to the kind of bordering river Tenno between Finland and Norway, regarding fisheries and Sami indigenous rights, for instance, in that context. And so I'm kind of my experience is more from the national level, but I'm hoping this can kind of contribute to the discussions of water diplomacy, and for instance in developing this conflict analysis tool. And I do find certainly potential in this kind of development of the tool, and I think that the kind of discussion and the kind of joint development of this kind of tool is probably just as important as the kind of tool itself as an end product, because I really feel that an important part of such an exercise, for instance, in the Finnish water diplomacy framework, is about building some sort of like shared frameworks where we can kind of address particular situations with similar terminology and vocabulary and so on. So I find this really, really interesting exercise. And also as a particular point of interest, I think it's super interesting to kind of try to discern what is the particular role of water in these conflict situations, since it, as you pointed out, it can be kind of a triggering a conflict, but it can also be a kind of entry point to a conflict resolution or mediation, peace mediation process. One thing that I wanted to mention to start with is a kind of I notice I tend to think of conflicts as a kind of a flow from the so-called metaphorical upstream to downstream. Maybe it's fitting for the water diplomacy context, but thinking of like upstream as in the root causes of conflict, the kind of more structural elements, and then the downstream is where the conflicts escalate, where kind of more immediate interventions are needed. And so, for instance, like in peace mediation interventions or other type of like interventions in that kind of more short-term focus. And my kind of initial question when this tool was discussed was kind of the question like where on this kind of continuum from very structural to very kind of situational effects, where is the conflict analysis tool most applicable? And I guess that's one question that we can continue to grapple with, and I'll comment more on that in the next question. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you, Lasse. And then finally, the last question to Soili. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Emma. So I look at this theme here from the field, let's say, from a small embassy in Central Asia. Our embassy in Astana covers Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. And then we have a roving ambassador based in Helsinki covering the other Central Asian countries. And so I'm not a specialist in water issues, but it has been very exciting to get to know this tool, and I can already say that I find it very useful and for also as a practical tool for an embassy. And as regards Central Asia, water is and has been an important factor in the disputes or clashes between neighboring states and internal conflicts. And unfortunately, some conflicts have from time to time developed to violent clashes. While water may not be the immediate reason for these conflicts, in many times it is involved as a trigger, as a casualty or a weapon. And this conflict analysis identifies many of the conflict factors that we see here. And I feel that this kind of analysis tool is very much needed right now when Central Asia is facing increasing geopolitical challenges and also dynamics related to climate change and energy transition are very much on the political agenda of these countries. And also there are challenges to democratic development of the societies. The tool helps to identify the potential causes of conflicts, but it also gives ideas how to approach water resources and water use from a wider angle, and how to use water diplomacy to promote cross-sectoral dialogue in regional cooperation. So based on this, I do think that water diplomacy analysis tool can be useful in my work also. The embassy, together with our colleagues in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, can identify potential actions and themes that could be used to prevent the escalation of problems related to water and natural resources, with the focus on foreign and security policy aspects. While this tool opens opportunities for cooperation with international organizations and countries outside of the region, we must recognize that in this case, the Central Asian countries themselves bear the responsibility of their transboundary water governance. This means that we can make recommendations, but ultimately the countries make decisions based on their own interests. So this makes the issues very sensitive and very complex. I very much like that this tool helps to bring about the dialogue between water, energy production, agriculture, and environment, with, of course, diplomacy. We should, in Central Asia, also promote more high-level political cross-sectoral discussions. But one challenge here is that the mandates of water-related organizations are limited to water issues, and this may make it difficult to assess broader benefits of transboundary water governance. So I think this kind of dialogue between political actors, then local people, let's say foreign ministers, sectoral ministries, it's very much needed, and this is the approach that I think this tool makes us understand and find the different factors that we can use in this work. Thank you.
Okay, great. I think we've heard from very different points of view now about your views on the conflict analysis tool, and it's very nice to hear that at least you are not immediately throwing it to the trash. So there seems to be a lot of potential to develop it further and hopefully also to use it in practice. And this definitely, I think now me and Katarina have both said it several times, but this definitely is an evolving process. So therefore, it's maybe good to next move into the sort of room for kind of improvement and the potential shortcomings of the conflict analysis tool in its present form, and the ways to develop it further and improve its maybe practicality even more. And here I've prepared more sort of individualized questions for you all based on your background. So maybe we can start with Mark this time, and I will ask you more specifically because your seminal work on hydrohegemony and the role of power in water diplomacy addresses the critical side of transboundary water interaction. So do you see a need to bring in power asymmetry more explicitly into the framework of our conflict analysis tool?
Thanks. I mean, the short answer is that the power asymmetry is in there when you look at the structural factors. And I think that's really great. I think the trick, though, to keep our eye on the ball and to be very relevant to diplomats is the application of this frame. I mean, there are a few shortcomings of the frame which I could share with you if we have time or in written. But I'd be more interested in how the good parts of the frame are applied. And here I was just thinking, when Antti mentioned the Nile before 2011, things really changed in 2011 for a number of reasons. If this tool had been used in 2009, let's say, would it have spotted the tipping point that came in 2010, actually, and starting in 2010 and then tipping in January 2011? And I think it could have, the tool could be useful, but only if some tough questions were actually answered. So if the tough power asymmetries weren't avoided, in other words. So for instance, how Egypt was trying to maintain the status quo, how the mediator, the third-party mediator, was very much favoring one side or one position over the others. If you do a very quick analysis of the profile actors, conflict factors, and dynamics, you see the structural favor of the arrangement was for Egypt at the time. The actors, I would say, and critically, were really only the state actors. I mean, civil society did pip up, and we all tried to do our best there, but not too much was out of the hands of the states, let's say. The conflict factors, if you look at the huge dependence on the Nile and the vulnerability of Egypt, there is a huge factor to consider, undoubtedly. And the dynamics, I mean, there was that legal stream, so the potential for international water law could have been explored back in 2009, which would have been useful and would have seen that, in fact, there was a sticking point all related to around equitable and reasonable use. And it would have also thrown up, a good analysis would have thrown up the tensions that were rising within Egypt at that point. Which makes you think, of course, now it's not just tense in Sudan and Ethiopia, there's a lot of blood being spilled in those two countries. And how is that going to affect our water diplomacy? But in short, a good analysis that confronted these issues head on would have noticed that the arrangement on the Nile shifted when the relative power asymmetry of each of the riparian actors shifted. And so maybe to incorporate power even to a greater extent, one way to do it is to consider the other side of cooperation. We've used the term cooperation a lot. I think we all think that cooperation is generally a good thing in the sense that it's leading to something both sides want. But if you understand that, as Naho Miramachi from King's College London says, that cooperation and conflict coexist, then there are all sorts of other facets of cooperation that are not exactly like the ones that are currently in our heads. So cooperation can be very instrumental. It can be used to maintain the status quo, and it can be used to do active stalling, or to stall the negotiations even very actively, but stalling them. The other aspect of power asymmetry that I think you would have to ask, and these are the awkward questions, are what are the interests of the third parties, whether it's track 1 or track 1.5 or track 2 diplomacy. Whoever's the mediator or the third parties, they also have interests, but those interests are not usually stated. And I think it'd be good if this tool could actually force us to shed light on all that. So in short, I think the analysis, this frame is excellent. I'm certainly going to use it in the Geneva Water Hub, but I would say we have to use it sharply and critically. I would also, if in case I don't have time later, I would just say that let's think about how to make this practical. The way that Marco Keskinen talks about policy takeaways to actually help diplomats. So there might be more grounding in the way that water moves, the other types of water like virtual water, soil water, food trade, all the baskets of benefits that might open up opportunities. We might get testing of this from other diplomats. We might think about how to integrate it with the art of diplomacy, because diplomacy is an art. And again, I'd say consider how diplomacy affects negotiations, realizing that informal negotiations are happening all the time. I'll stop there and happy to take any questions. Thanks, Emma.
Excellent, thank you. That was a very good illustration, or an interesting illustration of how this model could actually work in practice. And I'm sure that we both agree with Katarina that it has to be that the key is to implement it well and sharply. So that's something that we have to think about. Okay, thank you. We'll then move on to Alissa. And in your work, you have highlighted the role of local stakeholders in transboundary water conflict and cooperation. And our model also emphasizes the need to consider the role of local stakeholders as well as the national and international ones. So in your view, what could be done to ensure the incorporation of a broader range of stakeholders and their perspectives into the conflict analysis?
Thanks, Emma, for the question. And I maybe want to start by kind of picking up what Mark had mentioned, that a lot of our water diplomacy is really, the ownership of it is with the state. But I would argue that domestic pressure does play a role. So when we see a lot of protests, sometimes domestic conflict and violent conflict, that can pressure the state to change its position to appease the public, whether it leads to a desire for more cooperation throughout the basin, also conflictual postures, and also how that cooperation really does get implemented. And so I think we know that the public can be quite important in this and also can provide opportunities for interventions through track 2 diplomacy, for instance, where by building a little bit more acceptability in transboundary cooperation can then make it more palatable for states to then make that decision to enter into effective cooperation. And so you've touched a little bit on it. I know in the guidance document that you've shared in this that there's quite a few ways that we can bring in other stakeholder perspectives, be that through public surveys, interviews, and focus groups. And I think that those are valuable opportunities, but also, as you mentioned, that can be quite expensive and time limiting. And so I think there's other ways that we can really get about making sure we're bringing in other perspectives. And that can include looking at the discourse in media, for instance, or following, again, global data sets are not necessarily going to give you a lot of causality and deeper understanding, but following data sets like the ACLID or the Armed Conflict Location and Event data set that can start to indicate where we have some maybe local tensions occurring that might shape the dynamic of how the state is reacting. What I also want to just pull out of this quickly is also that Katarina mentioned, really when we're talking about these local to transboundary dynamics, it's not a one-way street. We also have where transboundary conflict and cooperation can then affect local actors. And so I know the conflict analysis tool, the primary, reason for this is really to understand how can we intervene in conflict dynamics. But you also mentioned that it can be important to look at the conflict sensitivity of particular interventions. And so with this, I think it's really important to emphasize also making sure that we are looking at the broader system. So you talk about in the dynamics of that, looking at the interrelationships. And so really teasing out the causality with different actors as well. So seeing that, for instance, if there's upstream infrastructure, what is going to be the local impact near the infrastructure, like potential displacement within the country that's choosing to implement that infrastructure, but then also how can that affect local communities downstream, like by changing the time span on floodplains that then can cause potential for local conflicts over water use. So I think I like the ways that have been brought up in the approach that you all have, and I think really emphasizing getting a full picture of that system analysis can really strengthen as well that other voices are brought into the conversation.
Thank you for those really concrete examples and points. We have to continue, I think, all of these discussions later on also in order to really get to the bottom of it. But I think this is really interesting. We'll move then to Lasse. And as you mentioned, we have had some previous discussions and you have contributed to the development of the conflict analysis tool. And you have previously pointed out very rightly that the circumstances in which conflict analysis is applied can vary, as you also mentioned in your previous speech, that they can vary from this very sort of conflict sensitive stage in a fragile region to attempting to mediate an outright conflict. And maybe so far our tool has focused more on the sort of anticipating conflict stage. But do you think that it could have a role also in the case of more acute conflict?
Yeah, thanks. And first, I think that it's some sort of like a zooming in, zooming out question. Again, the kind of like what is the broader context and the systemic elements versus more the situational factors. And I really was very interesting how Mark pointed out. I guess Antti also with pointing to the kind of timeline of different interventions and what can be kind of picked up at different times. So I think that's very, very relevant in this respect. And I guess the kind of the origins of the tool, they kind of are somehow grounded in kind of development cooperation and that field, and so it's flows quite naturally that it's probably more focused on the kind of anticipatory action and prevention and so on. So that's completely understandable. And maybe one issue that and certainly in the report and the way that you're describing it, there are also elements that are pointing to kind of for instance, incompatibilities and issues that are ripe, or kind of the ripeness of certain issues is an interesting consideration in terms of interventions to a more acute conflict situation. But I somehow do feel that and I think Katarina also pointed out this in the very beginning of this session, that when you mentioned that in this kind of a more acute conflict mediation or interventions in that sense, more focus could be and probably should be on the actors and their kind of actors' interests and perceptions. For instance, the sort of more actor-driven understanding of the situation, and of course that is kind of about kind of zooming in the situation, and it's very, I guess, very also different from a kind of bird's eye view of conflicts, where you kind of are using certain types of data and more like maybe desk study and literature review driven methods. So one question, I guess, and a challenge probably is that is there like some sort of like a quick and dirty version of a conflict analysis that could be applied in a particular situation, which of course also I think the pressures on time and resources can be different. And I think there's quite a big difference actually between more like kind of academic style conflict research and conflict analysis, where you have like ample time and to do your study and gather data from various sources, and then a lot of things can be done. But if you don't have that time and you have to kind of somehow extract data from different sources in very kind of rapid tempo, it poses other kinds of challenges. So that's one issue. And just very briefly to mention another aspect, I think, which I think is very interesting also in this, and as I mentioned in my beginning, first intervention, was that the way that the tool could be used as a kind of collective resource, I think. So who is using the tool is very relevant. And so if we have a group of diplomats who are about to or are interested in designing some sort of intervention in a given situation, how would the tool kind of best serve this kind of group of actors? So I've been experimenting in some of my projects with a kind of workshops methods for this kind of conflict clinic approach, where there's a kind of group of experts coming together to do a kind of a joint analysis of situation, more like this kind of situation room type of exercises. And maybe also another question which I find interesting is in terms of conflict analysis, can there be like some sort of like cumulative type of kind of somebody mentioned iteration as one aspect, that there could be kind of a set of pieces of analysis. Some would be in place on the more structural elements of a situation that could be easily kind of retrieved and then serve as a basis for kind of like a deeper, more situation-specific analysis. So that's another question. Thanks.
Excellent. Also very practical already considerations that we will definitely have to get back to and experiment more with, I think, as the work goes on. Good. Then we'll move to Soili. And as you mentioned, you were cooperating with our project while we were carrying out the Central Asia analysis. So based on that experience, what do you think would be necessary to sort of take into account and these necessary steps to make the analysis process more easy to approach for ministry officials as well?
A little hard question to answer at this point, because I have had so little to do with the tool and our ministry people as well. But I think that as such, it offers us a framework to assess the risks, needs, opportunities for water diplomacy efforts. And from embassy point of view, it also helps us maybe to identify and target our efforts and find the right partners to do our diplomacy. Development cooperation was mentioned here, and it is also here the basis on which we, of course, build our new efforts. And Finland's resources, unfortunately, are not huge, so we are quite a small actor here. So what I think is good, that we could maybe with this tool a little bit understand who would be the good partners and what kind of projects would be suitable for Finland to participate and have the support and more resources for our efforts. So find the niche where Finland can be proactive. And one very big player now here is the European Union. And as a member state, I think this is one actor that we need to cooperate with. And there are a lot of resources at the moment being allocated to regional projects in Central Asia, one being the Team Europe project covering water, energy, and climate change issues. So that is also one framework where I think we should be active and look for opportunities. But all in all, for monitoring the potential conflicts and how the situation is developing in the region, this conflict or this tool offers many good tools for us.
Okay, thank you. And that's great to hear that you mentioned the word monitoring, because I think that this is also exactly something that we wanted to achieve with this tool, that it wouldn't, like Katarina said, only like a one-off process, but more of a continuous monitoring enabler. All right, but then last but not least, we will go to Annukka, and I will actually ask her a twofold question. So first, how do you see the potential of the conflict analysis tool in emphasizing the nexus approach, and specifically referring to the water, food, energy nexus, which I know that you have been working with And then also for you, a bit more of a practical question, how and what could be done to ensure that the conflict analysis will be followed up with concrete water diplomacy measures then? Please go ahead.
Thanks for the question. Indeed, it's important that the tool recognizes the importance of the dynamics from the sectors as the water needs and impacts come from the different sectoral policies and investments, and addressing them in conflict prevention and resolution. It's really how to reconcile the different needs and how to reduce impacts early on. I think the next approach can really, considering water, food, energy ecosystems, it can really add to the effectiveness of the intervention, not to be overly limited by the water in front of diplomacy. And it also, this broadens very much the scope of possible actions, and I really like that Ambassador Mäkeläinen-Buhanist was pointing to also like climate change, trade. These are also areas where pressures on water can be reduced. But the framework as such, it doesn't. There are degrees of intersectorality, and it doesn't automatically provide for it. It depends on how it's applied, what's the context, who does it. But a beauty in this framework is the flexibility, the way you describe that. It's as Lasse was saying, it's not necessarily that you can do a long project with all options open when you do the analysis. I like this fast track idea that kind of dirty analysis would also be possible to do, and it would indeed be great if and it's crucial that the foreign ministries, if some embassy tries this tool out, that will be very very instructive. And also regarding further development, like what would be good modalities for ensuring this local expertise in applying the tool. That's maybe something to think about. And since Finland, we've got this water diplomacy network, there's great expertise for different aspects. As Katarina and Maju were pointing out, that this is this conflict analysis for water diplomacy, it's an umbrella tool. It can lead and point to more specific understanding being needed, or maybe a specific more interactive process, maybe this kind of conflict clinic that Lasse was referring to. So it would be really nice if this can be a living document and instrument, and some kind of community of practice can form around from the network that can develop this further, that it actually becomes a toolbox rather than a one individual tool. Thanks.
Thank you, Annukka. Really, really good points, and I definitely think that we also see it as a living thing and a toolbox, and are very, very happy to develop this further in cooperation, in partnerships, both within the Finnish water diplomacy network, but then also with international partners. So this is something that has been really important for us. We have time for a few questions, and I know that I've sort of promised the floor at least to Laura Turley. I'm not sure if it's possible to put your hand up. Apparently Sirpa at least is able to do it, but then Laura, if you're not able to put your hand up, then just drop a line in the chat if you want to ask something. Is it possible for Sirpa to ask the question herself? I'm not completely sure about the technology, but if you can enable your mic, then please go ahead, Sirpa.
Yes, it seems I succeeded in both putting the mic and the camera on. So my name is Sirpa Mäenpää. I used to be working within the Center for Peace Mediation in the ministry, but now I'm on retirement since half a year. So I'm talking totally in personal capacity. So thank you very much for the report. I think as a conflict analysis report, it is now the best example we have in Finland, because it's not only water diplomacy analysis report, it's also a general conflict analysis report. And frankly, we had some problem in finding good examples, because much of what is carried out in conflict analysis is the kind of continuous context analysis, the change of political situation, which is very much what our embassies also do, or then these kinds of workshops, the sheets with the post-it stickers, and which are valuable to the actors that participate in that workshop, but that have, let's say, limited application to some of our use. So now I am hearing, for instance, that this report has served well in bridging between water diplomacy experts or water experts and then general diplomats, bringing the political issues into the water experts realm and the other way around. So that, I think, has been a good framework. It seems to be also that when you produce something with value added of good quality, it would be also a possibility for sharing, because we like this mode of cooperation. So already here we have international cooperation, and in the end, you if you start sharing it normally very quickly is. I mean, one of the first interested partners would be the countries themselves. So obviously, it wouldn't stay within the expert realm. So this is still something that I would recommend you looking at it. Is it something that you would be happy to give to the ministers of these countries as it is? And when you are, so then it would be valuable to the whole community working on these issues. And also, obviously, it's a basis for planning, particularly for Finland, how to approach these situations. In these kind of situations, the conflict parties are looking for actors within their whole ecosystem of partners who with whom they can gain confidence slowly, step by step. And in that kind of, let's say, negotiation, what kind of actions, ideas we might suggest to them ourselves to test the community of partners, or Finland in Antti mentioned some community confidence building measures. Mark talked about the role of water in the whole conflict in particularly Israel-Palestine, transboundary water cooperation. How do you slide into really water diplomacy from Annika's point of view? Our good friend Lea Kauppi often talks about the national sectoral dialogues. That would be one example we have mentioned. So these kind of examples, how they would could be taken as examples. Thank you very much for the report. I'll come back to the tool that you took from International Alert, because let's say when one does conflict analysis, very often it's continuous, it's not just the report. So yes, we have heard, for instance, how United Nations, when invited, they have if maybe it was ACPP or some other kind of model, but yes, you have to structure somehow all the information that you get out of the situation, and this tool would be one example of it. So I think this will be part of the discussion that if these are the relevant dimensions, so fine. Another aspect in the process is what Lasse has been referring to, that there are conflict clinics, workshops, and we have also heard of their uses. For instance, Switzerland described to us how they used it in South Sudan in a particular situation. Frankly, often it is that after the clinic it's put aside, what remains as conclusions is in the heads of the actors. But then it might become revisited at the kind of quick, dramatic change in the situation, a fork kind of situation. And in that sense, having something as basis, as a joint, let's say, result of really all actors, all conflict actors at some level, local or let's say even interstate level. So that is one aspect that one might try to walk towards that direction. Within the ministry, we often had to do the quick and dirty conflict analysis in the sense that we can only attach maybe 2 pages of conflict analysis in our funding decisions. So maybe my question on that would be, what would you rescue from this whole report? I mean, when you write a scientific summary, you might try to take everything, but what would you like to take from the point of view towards this kind of decision? So I'll leave it to you. You don't have to try to answer it now, but just that you know that that's the reality of how your product would be used in that kind of context. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Sirpa, for these valuable remarks. We don't have a lot of time, but I would still like to take in Laura and then briefly give the floor for your brief sort of final comments. But please go ahead, Laura.
Thanks very much. I do think I can share here. Fantastic. Thanks. Yes, Laura Turley, work at the Geneva Water Hub with Mark Zeitoun, who's been on our panel. And just thank you to Emma and Katarina for these, for the research done and also this event. I just really wanted to take the occasion to echo Mark in the sense that I think it would be a really nice and useful tool for us at the Geneva Water Hub. I personally, I'm the researcher, and we love these kinds of tools that are quite flexible and open and generous. And then from a surprisingly simple entry point, you can get to a really nice level of depth and complexity in the use. So I really see this as a way for diplomats and others are to do their due diligence essentially before going into these sorts of tense situations. I think the kind of comments I wanted to add were mostly, more than shared by most of the panelists. But I was thinking quite a bit along the lines of what Annika had said about some of the very practical or pragmatic challenges, on the other hand, of using these more general frameworks, just in terms of depending on the researchers and, from one day to another, we can ourselves read something quite differently. So, I was just curious if in your first process, using it and applying it, if you already had, established some sort of intercoder reliability, even just reading each other's work, even just reading it differently the next day, and how that can add really a lot of value. I would even argue, even in a kind of quick and dirty situation, that would have a lot of value in just as making it as iterative a process as possible, given time and resources. That's all from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. I'm sorry to be so rushed, but unfortunately, we're running out of time, so I will give you each maybe 20 seconds to give some finalizing remarks. Maybe we'll start with Annukka, please. Please go ahead.
Thanks. Thanks very much. Just quickly, since this concern about limited resources was brought up, I just wanted to share one example that maybe not major resources are required, that we were able, by working together, to have one platform of more technical discussions among countries in Central Asia that could be followed by water diplomatic discussion when we joined forces between the Water Diplomacy Project, my ministry, Kazakhstan, Swiss Development Corporation, UNEC. I think that kind of thing could be a starting point for something. It also supported the development of this tool ongoing in parallel. Just for thought. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Thank you. How about Soili?
I just want to thank you for this very interesting webinar and being part of the Central Asia analysis. And I think we just need to work on this good tool. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Then Lasse.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm also looking forward to further discussions on the topic. It's been really rewarding to join the panel today and have hear from all of you. Maybe one thing that kind of is on the top of my mind at the moment is this kind of some sort of collaboration around conflict analysis and in environmental conflict resolution. We're using the one notion is joint fact finding. So this kind of, and of course that has been also used as one element in peace building, is to kind of use studies, let's say on water resources or climate change or whatever, as a one kind of conduit to bring the parties together in a more of a like a learning setting rather than a kind of a controversial or confrontational setting. So that's maybe one thing that is an interesting element and a question maybe whether conflict analysis can also be kind of performed jointly between parties in conflict or potentially in conflict, and if that something like that could be done. I don't know if it can be called conflict analysis in that context, but still that would of course be super interesting and valuable. Thanks.
Definitely something to think about. Thank you. Then Alissa.
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this panel and discuss this a bit more in depth, and maybe picking up Lasse's thread of conversation. I think I would be curious to explore if doing some of this analysis jointly could be beneficial on a transboundary scale. I mean, we have used it in peacebuilding processes more subnationally and locally, doing a shared understanding of the system just to also share perspectives. But I'm curious how it would work with a little bit more of the political dimensions that come into our transboundary systems. That being said, I just want to reiterate, I do think this is a great umbrella approach with different pieces to really pull out depending what is most relevant to a particular conflict. So I think in terms of the actual implementation, it is quite a broad analysis that can be used, but has a lot of beneficial pieces that I think users can take as they see fit based on where they are in their analysis and the amount of time and resources they have to dedicate towards this.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. And clearly we have to get back to these issues. And finally, Mark.
Well, the FIIA has thrown the gauntlet down, and you've given us the tool. Now I think it's just up to us to sharpen our analysis and then get out there and tackle these very important challenges very intelligently and with commitment. So I appreciate that, and we'll certainly be happy to help you develop the tool, and we'll be using versions of it as we continue over the years.
Excellent. That's really nice to hear. And thank you to all the panelists. Thank you also to Katarina. Do you want to say something, or you wrote something in the chat, but please go ahead.
Yeah, no, just I wanted to thank you all. These have been just excellent remarks and have given us a lot of food for thought. So yeah, we will definitely continue developing. I think especially for these different scenarios from the perspective of the user of the conflict analysis. So the quick and dirty, and a more upstream situation, a conflict situation. So I think that's something to work on now, maybe. But thanks so much. Really excellent discussion.
Yes. And thank you also to Antti for his remarks, and thank you to our great audience. And it seems that the discussion will continue, and we will keep working on this. So thank you at this stage, and I'm sure that we will be in touch in several occasions in the future. But thank you for today.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.